In last week's episode, we talked about how the structures of church that have built up historically, having a building, having a stage, having a clergy and laity, all of that works against the kind of mutual ministry and participation that the early church enjoyed. It works against the things that change people. And that explains the rise of house churches and home groups and different expressions of church that don't rely on those structures. But what if you're in that structure? What if you're a pastor or a member of a brick and mortar church and you want to see transformed lives? What do you do? Let's talk about it. Welcome to the Worship Homestead. My name is Nathan Smith. Thanks for joining me. Today, I'm specifically talking to pastors and churchgoers of brick and mortar churches. Usually I talk to home groups or house church members, but today I'm talking to people who have an institutional church that they go to, but they want to grow in fruitfulness. They want to see that transformed life that the early church had and that the Bible talks about. Well, how do you do that in the confines of structures like a stage, a building, clergy and laity, all the stuff that we have historically kind of added to church? Well, we'll get to that. But first, I want to give you something. If you go to my website, blueprintsounds.com, you can get access to my free worship training bundle called the Worship Booster Pack. It has PDFs and online guides and classes and everything from church songwriting, how to arrange your band, live sound tips, and much more. All of that is available for free on my website, or you can click on the link nearby, blueprintsounds.com/worship booster pack. All right, let's talk about how to make change within the structure of the church. I'm going to read two scriptures that talk about fruitfulness and what opposes fruitfulness, namely that is the religious spirit. So let's start by going to Matthew chapter 21, verse 12. This is when Jesus enters the temple. Jesus entered the temple area and drove out all who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves. "It is written," he said to them, "My house will be called a house of prayer, but you are making it a den of robbers." The blind and the lame came to him at the temple, and he healed them. But when the chief priests and the teachers of the law saw the wonderful things he did, and the children shouting in the temple area, "Hosanna to the Son of David," they were indignant. "Do you hear what these children are saying?" they asked him. "Yes," replied Jesus. "Have you never read, 'From the lips of children and infants you have ordained praise'?" And he left them and went out to the city of Bethany, where he spent the night. Early in the morning, as he was on his way back to the city, he was hungry. Seeing a fig tree by the road, he went up to it, but found nothing on it except leaves. He said to it, "May you never bear fruit again." Immediately the tree withered. When the disciples saw this, they were amazed. "How did the fig tree wither so quickly?" they asked. Jesus replied, "I tell you the truth, if you have faith and do not doubt, not only can you do what was done to this fig tree, but you can also say to this mountain, 'Go throw yourself in the sea,' and it will be done. If you believe, you will receive whatever you ask for in prayer." So the story of the temple and the story of the fig tree are put next to each other for a reason. Jesus visits the temple and he sees this practice happening in the temple, and that is the money changers in the court of the Gentiles. This is an example of what the religious spirit does. The religious spirit is not like witchcraft that is out and out opposed to the things of God by, spells and incantations. Instead, it crowds out true holiness. And here's what I mean. The way that this whole money-changing thing got started in the temple is because of a loophole. In the Old Testament, if you were a long way from Jerusalem, you were supposed to bring a lamb to sacrifice at the place that God chose, the temple eventually. Well, if you were a long way away, there's a possibility that your lamb could get maimed or injured or die on the way, and that was too big of a risk. So the Old Testament had a loophole. It said, hey, if you live a long way, you can exchange your lamb for money. Then when you get to the place that the Lord chooses, you turn that money back into the lamb, you buy a lamb, and then you can carry out with the sacrifice for the feast. Well, by Jesus' day, the temple leaders have figured out how to use this to make a lot of money. By having exchange rates, by only having special coins that could be used at the temple, and charging prices that were way above what they should have been charging, and having temple inspectors that would say, no, this lamb isn't good enough, you need to buy one of our own lambs or one of our own pigeons. And that practice got so big and popular that they started to crowd into the Gentiles' court, which was where the Gentiles were to be allowed. Gentile converts could come and worship Jehovah. Well, that's what the religious spirit does. It started as a loophole, and it's like they could justify it saying, no, this is for temple worship. We're doing it for the Lord. But then it starts to crowd out the space where people are supposed to be able to worship God. So on the one hand, they say, well, this is for the Lord. But on the other hand, they are actively in their hearts opposing true worship from the Gentiles. So Jesus can't stand that. He turns over the money tables and, of course, makes them very mad as he starts healing people and children start dancing and singing songs. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. That makes them very, very angry. Well, the next day, Jesus goes and visits a fig tree, which is obviously an allegory of the temple and of the religious leaders. And he visits that fig tree and he sees that it's full of leaves and it has no fruit. Well, I have a couple of fig trees in my backyard and I've learned a little bit about them, since owning them and living in this home. They grow extremely quickly. This last, winter, I pruned back my fig trees and I pruned them pretty hard and I was kind of nervous about it. I asked my Uncle Jeff, who is a great gardener, has been doing it for years, and he looked at it and he said, oh, don't you worry. They're going to be just fine. They are really vigorous. They're going to grow back great and you'll have plenty of figs. Nothing to worry about. Sure enough, now in August, full of leaves, it looks like I didn't even cut that fig tree to begin with. But when Jesus visits the fig tree, he only sees foliage. And he doesn't see any fruitfulness. And that's what causes him to curse the fig tree. And of course, he's speaking against the temple. Hey, Pharisees, Sadducees, temple leaders, you have the appearance of holiness. You have busyness and the appearance of productivity with your robes and all the rest of it. But you have crowded out the life of God from getting to fruitfulness, which is the Gentiles should have a house to pray in, right? That's the hallmark of the religious spirit. On the other hand, let's look at another fruit passage, and that's in John. If you've been a Christian for any time, you're probably familiar with this verse. In John 15, Jesus is talking to the disciples right before his crucifixion, and he says, I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit he prunes, so that it will be even more fruitful. You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. Remain in me, and I will remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. And so Jesus, in that passage, encourages his disciples. He tells them, you are in the vine. Remain in the vine, but also, as a part of this process, expect to be pruned, because that just means that you have a gardener who is nurturing you. I also have a grapevine in my backyard, and they're the same thing as figs. They're very vigorous growers, but they grow a lot of leaves, and you don't need all those leaves. You have to cut off those leaves so that the sunlight and air can get to the fruit, because that's what you care about, because that's what you're going to eat. You're not going to eat many leaves compared to the grapes. So if you are a pastor or a churchgoer and you want to go all in on fruitfulness, be aware that there is something that will compete with fruitfulness, and that is leaves. The appearance of productivity and busyness and showiness, like, hey, we're doing stuff, but it's not the same as fruitfulness. And I'm just talking about the first three fruits of the Spirit: love, joy, and peace. All of those are grown relationally. So now let's talk about things that you need to worry about as a pastor. Number one, if you're a pastor coming in on a Sunday morning, you need to start treating it like an away game. And here's what I mean. The structures that we talked about in last week's video, and those are the building, the stage, the specially trained group of people that do most of the talking and singing, the sermon itself, and the passive crowd facing forward in rows, those are all leaves. Those are things that will grow over time, and they have grown over time historically, if you think about the church and where all those practices came from. Those have grown up, and they don't oppose the things of God, they crowd out the things of God. They crowd out the fruit of the Spirit, just like a temple tax and having pigeons and lambs in the temple crowded out the court of the Gentiles. So the very things that we think of as church, the mechanisms of church, the sitting and the standing and the singing and the listening to sermons, can crowd out what we're supposed to be having, which is love, joy, and peace. And here's why that happens is because people get comfortable. And the things that make people comfortable are not the same things that make people grow. The things that make people grow, the things that make a community grow are this. When you have the weak and the strong mingling together, and when you have 3 generations meeting together as one, when you have grandparents, parents, and children all together in the same community, that's where growth happens. Because you're seeing somebody who's more mature than you react to situations. You get to model your behavior after them. You get to practice with your own peer group, and you get to teach a younger set of people. So that's why we are communally designed to have 3 generations together at once. Well, think about the church in America. The American model is a consumer model, and the way that it works is you look at the entirety of the situation and then you slice them up into demographics, and then you start serving those little niches. So we have a seniors ministry and a singles ministry and a women's ministry and a youth ministry and a children's ministry. Well, what we did was we took the community that should be all together and we sliced them up and we sent them to different rooms and had our programs to serve each one of those communities, just like you would if you were a focus group, wondering how to target your soft drink to a certain demographic. It's the same strategy. The problem with that is that you can make each one of those groups comfortable. You can serve their needs, and they'll even like it because they're hanging out with their friends and the people who are like them, but they won't grow because they're not together. God designed us to be 3 generations together, the weak and the strong together. That's not always comfortable, but it is what we need. So that brings us to the second thing that you have to keep in mind, and that is that programs are not the answer. If you want to increase love, joy, and peace in your people, programs are not going to get you there. But unpacking the design of your people and allowing them to serve could do it. And here's what I mean. Let's say that you had a guy, 65, he's retired, but he has an engineering background and he wants to see fathers spend more time with their sons. Well, what if your church hosted a Pinewood Derby? They bought 25 or 30 kits for cars and made the church available on Thursday nights with some tools so that fathers and sons could come and learn how to build that car together. And then on a Saturday night, had the track and had it all ready so that fathers and sons could do this activity together. But the derby is not the point. Really, the point is fathering. That's the whole point of the thing. It's just that it's the playing field for getting to what we really want to get to, which is the generations coming together. Likewise, what if you had a stay-at-home mom who had some serious baking skills and she wanted to see the young girls in their church with better role models than just Disney characters? Well, what if they used the church kitchen to make cupcakes and sell them at the Pinewood Derby? All it takes is a person or a couple of people with maturity that want to spread love, joy, and peace. They want to grow that in their community, and they see the activity, they see the program as a playing field, not the point. And here's the third one, and this one is a little uncomfortable: the idea of pruning. Not every program in your church has the life of God in it, because your church and your people have a specific design. And unfortunately, one of the things that the religious spirit can get you to do is get you to keep carrying the load that was started 3 or 4 generations ago, and that program is still running, and it's still running because it's still running. The vision is gone. The person who, had started it is no longer at the church. They've passed on or whatever, and we still keep that program going because for some reason. But again, not every church program has the life of God in it, and not every element of a church service needs to be as good as the church across the street. Churches have different designs and giftings, and that takes research into your own people to find out what is our church really good at, where is the life of God that we can lean into, and that might mean that we have to prune off some things that aren't working. If you want to go all in on fruitfulness, on love, joy, and peace, those are all grown relationally, and it looks a lot more like mature mothers and fathers than it does a business model catering to different demographics. If you want to go all in on fruitfulness, start to look at the design of your people and the design of your church rather than what programs you can plug people into. And finally, if you want to go all in on fruitfulness, allow God to prune some things, either personally or corporately, that don't need to be there anymore. Yes, it hurts a little bit, but we're after fruit, not leaves. Hey, I hope that episode helps you. And if you need help with your worship team, go to my website, blueprintsounds.com/worship booster pack. If you're listening to the podcast, leave a review. It helps me out. Likewise, if you're watching on YouTube, like and subscribe. All right, until next week, God bless and goodbye.